All right, let's get the view now of the South African Human Rights Commission, Gauteng manager there, Mbeki, joining us now for more on that story. Zama, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. I mean, just listening to that, the city saying it's the least bad option because our options are limited. And when we assessed what the situation is, this was the best of the worst, I suppose, if we want to put it that way. Is there a guideline, a handbook, a guidebook as to what would be an acceptable temporary accommodation?
Thank you for having us, Thabo. Indeed, there is. We are guided by a housing code which makes provision for how emergency housing should be provided and the circumstances under which the Department of Human Settlements should interact with the municipality. And in those circumstances, emergency housing should be provided. But we've also noted in terms of some developments in case law that have indicated how the city should be implementing or rolling out its implementation of emergency housing. There are certain standards, and as you've said earlier on, the issue of water, sanitation, electricity are things that should be there because, as the city has also said, they don't know how long the residents are going to be living there. So the basic needs that you and I have are things that are supposed to be provided in terms of emergency housing.
So this is a site that was really bought for vehicle impoundment. So it was not a site that was really bought to accommodate people, but it's an emergency. Nobody would have, I suppose somebody would have said that building was a fire hazard. Somebody should have actually predicted that it would catch fire at some point in time. But the city is saying, well, it's an emergency. No one really would have predicted that there would be a fire. And so we have to put them there, albeit temporarily. What would have been the assessment that they would have needed to do first before making that decision?
Well, it's always a needs assessment, and that's always important to make sure that how many people are you actually catering for. So in terms of this site, the Human Rights Commission was on site last week, and we intend to go back again to monitor this rollout by the city as well as the Department of Human Settlements. But you'll note, Thabo, that the people who are living there are not just the victims of the Usindiso fire. We noted that there are other residents who are also moving in. Those who've been affected by other forms of disaster previously have also been catered for on site. They've been those who informed us that they were part of a fire that broke out in Johannesburg South in Boysons 3 years ago. And they've been living in a community hall for the past 3 years. I think there are about 13 households, and they've also been catered for. And as well as other communities that have been formed after disasters have occurred in the city of Johannesburg. So it's not just those, but the main thing that needs to be assessed is the needs assessment and the ability for the city to make such provision available, meaning the city needs to say, as they said earlier on, can they make provision of this for accommodation within their shelters? And if not in the shelter, where can they actually house everybody who is in need? And that, as I said earlier on, is the assessment, is that it needs to make provision for those who are in need.
Yeah. So what are the steps then that you will take now as the South African Human Rights Commission to rectify the situation?
So as I indicated that as the Human Rights Commission, we were on site on Friday, monitoring as people were going on and occupying or taking occupation of the houses. There are a number of things that we noted that were of concern in terms of also just if I can put it that way, the structures themselves. We noted that, for instance, the locks were only outside. We also noted, based on the statements that we took from people who are working, because it is an industrial area, that the area is actually prone to flooding, and that previously when there are heavy rains, because it is at a decline, that it is susceptible to flooding. We've also noted in terms of the general safety of the area, we noted that there are children who have been there, and we've already been in contact with the Department of Education to come on site and document all of the children, not just, as we said earlier on, for the victims of the Usindiso fire, but everybody who's been relocated, because people have been relocated, some from about 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers from where they were previously resident. And this could affect the education of those learners, as well as where they access their healthcare services. All of those things need to be documented, and the relevant departments need to come inside. But most importantly, and as was said by some of the victims earlier on, is that we've got basic issues that are still a concern to us at the moment, that people still don't have their IDs, and some have still not been granted access to where they'd previously moved. And those are particularly the people who are staying at Hoflands, because they need to go back to go and get some of their materials. Because what has been told to the commission is that they were actually told that they were going to just look at where they were potentially moving, not that they would be moving on that day.
Right.
And then when they were told, when they arrived there.
Let's expand on that a little bit, because there are other issues that are beginning to emerge, especially around documentation and immigration officers. Zamantungwa Mbeki staying with us when we return. One of the people saying that they were not even told, they were not even warned, but immigration officers rocked up there. They were checking people for their identities, even using biometric machines, and some people were then taken to Jeppe police station, I suppose being deemed illegal foreigners. What's your take on that process?
So initially what happened was that people had, as you would imagine, people lost their documentation when the fire happened. And what was the call at that time was for Department of Home Affairs to come on board and assist in providing documentation for everyone. Now, subsequently, it also created a process where either those who maybe fall part of the asylum seeker process or the refugee process, their documentation or verification has taken longer to confirm by the Department of Home Affairs, some of which resulting in them being detained and remain detained, I think per the court judgment now, being remanded at Lindela. But also for South Africans, what it did is that for those who were able, for Home Affairs to confirm their documentation, they were able to be provided with their documentation and could further apply or regain access to the SASSA grant system. So though it was a process that was meant for good, for some it has meant that because they're of the system, they've been unable to confirm, or it's taken longer to confirm their asylum status, noting all of the challenges that currently exist with the asylum and refugee documentation process. And this to us is a bit of a concern, looking at the time period and how long some of these confirmations have taken place to happen.
So this was something that the city and the Department of Home Affairs would have decided to do on their own? Were they obligated to consult, I don't know, with NGOs and other organizations that would possibly be helping the victims?
Thabo, it would have been something that would happen if you note that when a disaster happens, usually all of the departments come together to assist. And this would have been done, I don't want to say in a bad way, like in good faith, as a means of documenting everyone. But now what has in turn happened is that it created a system of differentiating between South Africans and so-called non-South Africans, even though there are non-South Africans who are documented in terms of different visas or asylum seeker and refugee permits. But what we've noted is that those who are documented outside of an ID, it's just taken longer, or we don't know what the hindrance is in terms of documenting those who were already documented.
Okay.
Let's put aside those who are undocumented. So there are people who were living at Usindiso who were documented, who were legally in South Africa as asylum seekers and refugees, or were documented in terms of some permit or another.
Yeah. So is it your experience as well as you were doing your inspection on the ground that there are some who cannot be documented, knowing that they've lost their documentation in the fire?
Yes. When we spoke, most of the people have lost their documentation based on what they have been informing the social workers who've been on the ground and the NGOs that have been on the ground. There are obviously those who are undocumented. Yes, there is that subcategory of people who are undocumented before the fire took place, but there are also those who were documented. And if we look at the current challenges that exist for just an ordinary asylum, a person with an asylum seeker or refugee permit to try and extend or renew their permit. It's a system that has got massive backlogs, but it means that these people who were documented beforehand are now susceptible to the same process, and it's even taking longer for them to get their documentation or get their verification from the Department of Home Affairs and Immigration Services.
So is there a commitment then to make those services available, or the services will be installed so that the people can be processed much quicker, those who require that kind of assistance?
At the moment, I don't have any indication that there is such a process. As we said, that this matter was before the courts, and the latest decision being that those who were detained, I think it's about 34 people are currently being detained at Lindela for these verifications to happen. The judgment being that they can't make this assessment. It needs to be done only through, as you will know, through immigration services. And because of that, they've then been remanded or sent to Lindela so that all of these verifications can happen through the Department of Home Affairs at Lindela.
Zamantungwa, Mbeki, much appreciated. Thank you very much for coming on. Gauteng Manager for the South African Human Rights Commission.